Can you hear me, Faraz?
I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Please turn on your video. Yes, we may begin your live.
All right. I called Murad and I told him I lost my computer. I can't join.
The phone might have been believable. I don't know. I'm not sure about the computer.
What?
The phone might have been believable. I'm not sure about a computer.
That's why I wanted to say computer. It's so obnoxious.
So let's start, guys. You guys are live.
Thank you very much. Sure, let's get started. Sal, thank you for being here. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Why don't we start with a quick introduction of ARCOS, and then I can maybe do a quick introduction of analytics and TENX?
Yeah, sounds good. So, by the way, how is everybody on? Can people hear me okay? Just want to make sure.
Yes, people can hear you fine.
Okay, excellent. So Arcos is a data play in golf. We are the preeminent, I would say, technology company in terms of capturing what's actually happening on the golf course. We record every shot that the golfer is taking. And so we have sensors that do that attach to the grip end of the club. And then we have like all that data goes into the cloud and we analyze the data and give golfers insights about what their strengths and weaknesses are, how can they get better. And the business model is relatively simple. It's $120 at this point, $120 a year subscription. And it's basically functioning as your caddy and your coach and maybe a whole lot more in one. And from a product distribution strategy, we partner with club manufacturers, golf club manufacturers. So we have partnerships with Cobra, with Ping, with TaylorMade. So 3 of the 5 biggest companies where when you buy their clubs, you get ARCOS, you get a free trial to ARCOS. And then after that, you're enrolled into the subscription model. And to date, we've recorded over 500 million, so 500 million plus golf shots. And we're growing rapidly, and it's an exciting. So I'll stop there. Faraz, I'll turn it over to you.
Talk a little bit also, Sal, about all the countries that ARCOS is located as a company and then also being used.
Yeah, so I mean, from a usage standpoint, it's actually pretty interesting. We're used in 194 different countries. We have users in 194. It's a global platform, which means we have to have not just like the courses in every single country mapped, but also language support and all these different units, metrics versus like some places it's yards, some places it's meters, some places it's feet. It's a combination. So supporting all of that, supporting languages, supporting the different cultures of golf and how scoring is done. And from the team perspective, we're also globally distributed. We have most of our folks in the US, but our AI stuff is all in Pakistan. And then all our manufacturing, hardware manufacturing is in China. Actually, some of it is also in the US. And then we have people in we have engineers in France. And then we have sales and marketing, some sales and marketing in the United Kingdom as well.
Okay, that's amazing. And that's actually a good segue into the analytics and TENX introduction. So analytics is the Pakistani branch of the company, and then TENX is how we're branded in North America and globally. So we're essentially a data company, a technology company. We help organizations like ARCOS do more with technology and data. So we have end-to-end offerings. We do everything from strategy and consulting to project roadmaps to data integration, artificial intelligence, and then everything in between, which includes software development and mobile app development as well. We've been working with ARCOS now for many years. I think it's been close to 5 years, Sal, that you have been able to get rid of us. And we've been working on multiple products, including something that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, which is the first AI Caddy in the world of golf. So let's talk about that a little bit more. But Sal, let me, obviously ARCOS has been a huge success. Wherever you look in the world of golf, people are talking about it. People are talking about, how you've come and basically revolutionized the world of golf. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, you're always on, various channels in the US media. What makes golf such a good use case for analytics and AI?
I mean, it is interesting. I was speaking at the MIT Sports Analytics Conference, which happens every year. And that's where almost all the AI in sports goes. And I was a speaker there a few years back, pre-COVID. And I was hanging out with one of the co-founders of that conference, who's also basically, his name's Daryl Morey. He's basically Moneyball for basketball. And I was he created the scale of sports. He said baseball is a 10 in terms of 10 out of 10 in terms of suitability for advanced analytics and AI. And then basketball was a 7 and sports go down. And he didn't mention golf in there. And the reason he'd ranked baseball so high was you can isolate the pitcher's quality. It's basically less continuous, more discrete. Basketball gets more continuous, so the harder it gets to separate stuff out. And golf really is totally discrete. Every shot is its own entity. You have a starting point, you have an ending point. So I was golf's even better for analytics. Do you agree? And he was actually, I didn't think about it. And golf really is even maybe a 12 at that scale. And I mean, the reason is the ball's not coming. Nobody's like in cricket, you have to account for the bowler's quality. In golf, every variable you can you can account for more accurately because the ball's stationary. And so
you can self-contained. There's no other way.
And then you know what the weather conditions are, you know what the starting point is, you know what the end goal is, what the golfer's trying to do. So it really lends itself to, if you record the data correctly, there isn't a better sport that's built for analytics than golf.
I think the other thing I want to add here is that other impacts, so things like environmental factors, wind speed, maybe altitude, humidity, all these things that matter on a golf course are also easily captured now, right? With all these data sources available. So
data sources available on that.
For your analysis, it's pretty easy to do.
So and it's also now easier to do all the AI analysis that, I would say the technology, whether it's the algorithms, the prevalence and the access to those algorithms and the hardware, the access to that hardware, the faster processing of data, all that stuff wasn't available, even say 7 years ago, 8 years ago, to companies that aren't Microsofts of the world. And that has become more available. So now, and then I also think the skill level of, there's more engineers, more interest in data analysis, data science. There's a lot more people who are thinking about it. And so it's just a combination of all those factors. And for us particularly, it's also the miniaturization of the sensors and the prevalence of the smartphone. So GPS technology getting better, the accelerometer becoming cheap enough for us to put it in every club. The microprocessors getting cheap enough, not just from a cost perspective, but also from a battery consumption perspective. So it's all these mega trends that are enabling data capture, data analysis, and then golf sets up perfectly because it's a sport that you want. And also, by the way, it's a sport that is a personal challenge. I would say it's probably attracts I don't want to stereotype, but I would say more intellectually curious people, because it is a challenge against yourself. And that it's not you're playing, all of a sudden you're playing, I don't know, the audiences are cricket lovers, but I certainly am. And so it's not you're playing against one ball might be against one delivery you're facing from Shoaib Akhtar and the other one might be from me. And those two are very different. In golf, it's always just you out there. So
yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting you mentioned that all these technology techniques that you're using. It feels like you're a bit of a marketing brochure here of all the big data, ML, artificial intelligence. I think all we need to do is just introduce some blockchain in here, and I think we'll have a complete suite of
NFT.
NFTs. create an NFT out of, maybe just make an offer like of an NFT automatically. If a hole in one is detected on the platform, just create an NFT and put it on the market right away. But I think one thing that's important to mention here is that the data capture is being done by using Arcos proprietary sensors. So they go on the back of your club, and they're basically tracking your game from start to finish. So they know where you hit the shot from, they know how far it went, and so all of that data goes into the Arcos app.
And the way people always ask, like, how do you know how far it went? That's where you take your next shot from. So we're recording where you hit your shot, then you, by virtue of taking the next shot from where the ball went, that's how we're able to figure out where that shot ended up.
Right. Perfect. So I'll talk a little bit about the Arcos Caddy. So this is a product that TENX Analytics and Arcos worked on in collaboration with Microsoft. And the idea here was to develop something, when we first started, there was a lot of data available. Like Sal said, there's 500 million shots of data available now from around the world. And that's a huge data set, right, by any standard. And so the idea was to come up with a product which essentially helps Arcos become, differentiate from the competitors in the market. And then also come up with something that would be interesting for golf users. So, after much brainstorming, and we'll talk about how, we came to that decision, but Arcos decided to build an Arcos Caddy, which is essentially just like a real caddy who's your helper on the golf course and makes recommendations because they know your game, they know the environmental conditions, they know what the course is doing in general, and maybe that day, the caddy makes recommendations as to achieve the best score on a given hole. And this is a really interesting point, because there's a lot of people that you come across in this industry that feel that AI is a really great concept in academic papers, and it's a really good marketing line, but there's limited practical value. But obviously, Arcos Caddy is an example of something which has had a real world impact. So can you share some stories about how Arcos has made a difference in the world, how Arcos has impacted real world golfers and not just pretty buzzword to put on your website?
Yeah. I mean, I can start with the way we came about the concept of like an AI caddy was we were doing a hackathon. I think Murad from TENX was there, I believe. But we're doing like a hack fest with Microsoft, and Microsoft invited us because they had Bryson DeChambeau there, who was one of their sponsored players, who's like now, like I would say after Tiger Woods, the most famous golfer in the world. And we were looking at all these shots and brainstorming and started thinking, with all this data, we should be able to predict what your optimal path. Like in the end, as a golfer, what you're trying to do is you have a start point, you have an end point. Your starting point is the tee shot or where the hole starts, and the end point is you got to get the ball in the cup. And then there's obstacles in the way. There's the fairway, there's bunkers, there might be water, there's rough. And so based on your data, based on your dispersion patterns, based on the weather conditions, based on the direction of the wind, based on the temperature, AI, it's like a perfect AI problem to predict what the optimal club to select from any point is. And so that's what we start. That's how we start. And by the way, it wasn't something new that we were doing in the sense this concept exists in the real world, where a human caddy, which every professional golfer has, that's what they're trying to help the coaches and the caddies. That's what they're trying to do, is help the golfer get to the optimal outcome and optimal decision for every shot. And so this became like literally, I mean, it just made sense because I'm a student of the history of the game. And like when you look at some of the old golf's probably the oldest sport right now that's still like maybe outside of polo that's played. And it's been around at least for 500 years in its current form. And one of the oldest paintings is Mary, Queen of Scots, with a caddy. And so the caddy's always been an integral part of the game. And so we were like, how cool would it be if through technology we can reinvent what the caddy does, but also democratizes. Like caddies are expensive. Not like 99% of golfers probably can't afford it. Or maybe if it's not 99, 95%. And so it would be bringing something back that's been lost because of the economic reasons that of affordability and accessibility. And so that's how we started. And like then once again, it's set up perfectly because we know every shot how it's being taken. We know, like, when you're when the wind's coming out of the left, your dispersion increases more to the right, and there's a bunker over there. So maybe you shouldn't hit driver, you should hit a 3-wood because that has less impact. So it's set up perfectly. And then in terms of real world examples, we get testimonials all the time. Like our average user improves 5.2 shots. That's something we track in their first round. So I think that's probably the biggest testament. And then I would say I'm probably
percentage for like those people that might not have a deep knowledge of golf. Like, what is that in terms of percentage from your average golfer?
Yeah, so there's different ways to look at a percentage. I would say from a scoring standpoint, percentage might be anywhere from a 5 to a 10% increase, but that's not really the way to measure it. I would say from a handicap standpoint, which is how that's how golf is measured. If you're 20, so our average 20 handicap improves by about 25%. So that's a 25 to 30% improvement for the average golfer, which is pretty incredible. And that's in the first year. And the reason is one, like I would say certainly you start understanding your strengths and weaknesses better. You start making better decisions because there was an article written in Golf Digest. It was really interesting. They went and followed a random Arcos user and had him hit like literally every single shot that the caddy recommended. And he shot one of the best rounds of his life. And some of them were counterintuitive, where he's like, there was that debate going on, like the machine is telling me to do this, or the computer or whatever AI, but I don't believe it, but I'm going to do it. And then it would end up being the right outcome. Which was
what is the real world example of that?
What do you mean? That was literally what happened in the real world.
Where there's a debate, like, are you talking about like hitting over trees or trying to hit over something?
So people will overestimate, like what will happen is like the AI will know, like you're not good with your 6-iron. So you should maybe hit a 5-iron. You're not as good as you think with your 6-iron, but there's a cognitive bias in your brain because you've convinced yourself you're awesome with your 6-iron because maybe you hit that one great shot and that's imprinted in your mind.
Great shot one time and the wind will behind you.
So like the cool thing about like ML is it's learning. It's actually learning. Your brain learns certain things that it wants to. And that's where the cognitive biases come in. And so I would say like we're able to dispel that cognitive bias by really presenting cold hard facts. Like, no, your 6-iron goes this far. This is a 5-iron, which is fascinating.
And then it also takes into account things like the environmental conditions that day, right? Which a human is not really the best reading.
Yeah. So it takes into account like what the impact of wind is based on the angle, based on gusts. We also know gusts. We also take temperature into account because that has a big impact. We take elevation because we have all the courses 3D map. So we know like, all right, this shot is like 40 feet like downhill. That has an impact on how like the ball is going to go a little bit longer. So all those things are perfectly set up. And that's all learned, by the way.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it's impossible for a human to process all that information in real time and come up with the perfect decision, right? Because it's
especially the average. Yeah, especially I would say like maybe the professional golfers, because they have so much experience, they actually go like, so here's what happens in professional golf. The caddies will go in advance and map out like, okay, this is 40 feet downhill. They'll do math on it and figure out what the impact is. So they have like full-time person that they're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to do all of this. And what we're presenting to the average golfer who's never going to go out and be like, let me scout out this new course and like walk it first, map it and everything, and then I'll go play. Like we're given
angles and my drop.
Yeah, and in fact, what's funny is at the PGA Tour, even on PGA Tour, when the caddies go out first, they're actually mapping a lot of it with Arcos because they themselves are like, we don't like, how do we figure out how downhill and temperature and when like angle of wind or how do those factor in? So they're actually using Arcos Caddy and writing those down. And it's interesting. Like we're basically making the caddies better too.
Well, that's amazing. That's amazing. In terms of selecting the right use cases, right? So, I mean, obviously Caddy was the right use case, and you talked a little bit about how you came to that decision. We work with a number of organizations globally in trying to identify, within their domain, whether it's banking or retail or consumer goods or whatever it is, what is the right initiative for them to take? And obviously, it's always a balance between complexity and value. So you obviously want to make sure you do something which delivers value, but then you also want to make sure it's something which is relatively less complex, so you can get some wins under your belt before trying to move on to something which might be more complicated.
Yeah.
And one constant across the board is that resources are always limited. I mean, there's always a fight for resources within organizations. Everybody wants to do their own thing, and everybody has a different priorities across different departments. Just talk a little bit about how you made the decision and internally about
Sure.
Arcos Caddy being the right place to focus on, and how did you align the organization behind you?
So loaded question, lots of things to talk about there. I will say it has to start with the customer or the consumer or the user. I'll talk specifically in Arcos's case, the most important thing for us is this actually going to deliver real value to the end user, or is it something we're just thinking will be really cool to talk about? Which, I mean, that's a trap you can fall in, because AI can do really cool things, but the impact might be very limited. So it has to start with how big an impact, how is this actually delivering real value to users that they'll continue using? And then we think about it, okay, so there's real value. This is the thing we want to do. Do we have the right data for this? Are we capturing, and is it easy to capture the right data? Because and is the data structured in the right way? I think the structure of the data can happen, but is the data being captured? How hard is it to capture that data that we need to deliver this ML, neural net, whatever solution that might be? That's the next thing. And then we look at there's always an end state, a vision you might have for how the user might use it. And in fact, the way we think about it is we write a press release. And that's something I learned from IDEO, which is one of the top design firms in the world who we've worked with. And it's okay, write a press release on what your end what would you like to see in the media written about this? And that is a very good distilling function. And then you think about, okay, so now it's delivering end user value. We can capture this data, or we already are, or it's easy to execute upon, or that's something we must execute upon. And then the next thing is, what are the steps you need to take? You shouldn't try to get to the end state immediately, because then you're going to take forever and nothing's going to happen in the middle and you're not going to learn anything. But then you try to break it up, within that, maybe these are the 4 releases we're going to do to get there. First one probably should be the easiest, lowest hanging fruit, and incrementally it gets a little bit harder. But that's how we think about it in terms of aligning people internally. So they have to be involved as part, the ethos always has to be the product team, everybody's involved in that decision-making process. And everybody has insight into it. It's not all of a sudden, here's what we've come up with, you guys go build it.
Right.
And the rationale has to be explained. It has to make logical sense to the engineers, because they have to be bought in. Because if they're not bought in, you're not going to get a great product.
Right.
And that's one of the things I would say we do with the engineers at TENX. They're intimately involved with everything we're building. Our product management team, our engineering team is communicating that. And then the other thing we do is we want people within Arcos, or all our engineers, use the product. So we have a culture of, I would say, empathy to the user, which can't be the case in every single industry, but as much as it could be, it's very, very helpful. And then you have to there's only I think you have to one of the things Kevin Systrom, who's the CEO and founder of Instagram, really resonates with me. He said it's not what you build, it's what you don't build that defines your product. Because you can do 1,000 different things, and what ends up happening, the more you do, the less diluted everything else. So for us, we really focus on, okay, maybe one key feature a year that we're going to really hit out of the park, which is their differentiator. Nobody else can do it, and we're going to go really deep and understand the consumer.
Yeah. One thing I want to zoom in on a little bit, I think you mentioned the concept of a press release. Now, I don't think you're talking about an actual press release that goes to the media. I think it's more about taking that use case and summarizing it in your head such that you're very, very clear about what the business value is going to be. And then you use that to align everybody around that same goal.
Yeah. So maybe instead of thinking of it like a press release, you think of it like an article. Let's say New York Times wrote an article about something you're doing, what would that be? Because then you
Right.
really have to distill it. You have to simply explain it,
Right.
because if it's in the New York Times, it's not going to be super technical. It's not going to. So how do you simply explain it to people? Which
Right.
makes you. It's like a distilling function.
Right. The other thing as well, I think this is really important, just to add to what you said, is making sure that whatever we're doing, and this is our advice to most of the clients that we work with, is to make sure that AI projects or any projects really are mapped to measurable business outcomes. So, I know that we've done work around the customer journey side of things with you as well. But if we're able to get an extra customer or retain a customer that was perhaps thinking of canceling their subscription, what does that mean in terms of our revenue, right? What does that mean in terms of bottom line?
Yep.
We're able to get, understand customer feedback on public forums and respond proactively instead of waiting for the customer to make a complaint. How does that impact brand value, right? So I think that if you start thinking about those outcomes, then it becomes really easy to understand the value of potential initiatives and then make a call on, sort of a go, no go decision on what you want to do.
Yeah, we use a methodology called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. There's an awesome book by John Doerr called Measure What Matters. So for us, every feature release has to tie into the OKRs, and some of the it's a great methodology, very simple thing. Google uses it, Intel uses it, like all the top tech companies use it, and it helps you focus on what are the 4 or 5 things that the entire business should be working on. And then you split it up into like who's responsible for what and how do you measure each one of those objectives. And for us, generally the features will fall into, is it going to increase the number of activations? Is it going to increase the number of conversions? Is it going to increase renewals? Is it going to increase tickets? So we measure all these various factors. Or is it going to increase the improvement the average user gets? So we're measuring all of those things. And then we know like, okay, we put this out. What parts of the business did it impact? Is it impacting on all of these or not?
Right.
And by the way, like you don't get it right every time, but the key is like one, making sure early on that you understand how it's tied to those objectives, 2, measuring it, learning from it, and adjusting. And the best
that's really important. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that actually came into my mind when you were describing the process that you take to get to execute AI projects, is that it's not always going to work. I mean, sometimes the data will just show that, sometimes you'll run into cases where there's no data, but many times you'll actually run into cases where you find that there's no correlation with, outcomes that you were hoping to predict.
But that's an insight too.
Exactly, yeah. So that should not be looked upon as a failure, because it's like, well, if there's no insight here, then maybe we have some assumptions wrong in terms of how we feel things are happening within our company.
Yeah, I mean, like one example I'll give on that was we're basically trying to figure out how can we create like a relative difficulty from course A to course B. And the first pass we took at it, and this is like there's data R&D involved here. First pass we took at it, the model, the variable, like the features we put in, didn't yield when you have more bunkers and course gets harder, things like that. Some certain assumptions we had, it didn't yield, it kind of dispelled that. Then we started thinking deeper about, okay, so maybe we need to put in 3D features in because the depth of the bunkers might matter, not the area. So you start going deeper into it to understand. And like the key, I would say, like with any data project, there is some learning. Like you have to think about what was like. Sometimes you have to think deeply about what does this outcome tell you, and it might be non-obvious, but there's always some insight.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting I mean, if you found out that bunkers below a certain size have no impact on the whole difficulty, then that's a really cool insight to have.
Yeah.
The other thing I think, and this is a good segue into the next sort of discussion point, it's around patience, right? So I think that AI projects, again, going back, technology projects in general, but more so AI projects need patience. I'll talk a little bit about when we built the Caddy. It involved a lot of preparation and sort of the unglamorous, cool work behind the scenes in terms of trying to identify relevant data sources, preparing them, bringing them onto one platform, integrating them, doing a lot of analysis to figure out the relationships between data such that we could get to a point where it could be modeled. And then even with that, like you said, you try a number of different modeling approaches until you get to something that you're all happy with and you're comfortable that this works and this delivers intended outcome. And all of this, I mean, I think for us, it took I think a few months to get to a stage where we were comfortable that this was delivering enough value to start packaging that into a product. But how does that work in terms of, obviously you're paying for your engineers all the while this is happening. As a CEO, who's somebody who's accountable financially, what is your advice to executives and project sponsors who might perhaps be feeling frustrated at the progress of their own AI initiatives or lack of progress?
Yeah, I think the first piece would be to maybe get more educated around, like, I have this advantage that I myself was a data architect and a data engineer before I co-founded Arcos. And so I understand, like, if you do the groundwork right, it leads to faster iterations down the road. And so, like, I would say anybody who's trying to, like, you should listen to the data engineers and data scientists around, like, here are the, like, that's what I've learned is, like, let them set the foundations up correctly so that in the future, the iterative work, like, otherwise you're going to have to redo it. Like, if you kind of force them into shortcuts up front, it's going to cost you years later when, like, maybe you're trying to add a new feature and it wasn't structured correctly because it was done faster. So I'd say my advice is twofold. One is try to educate yourself and learn from, like, either listen to the data teams that you're working with, or maybe read certain books. I don't know what books I'd recommend right now, but I'm sure there are great books on data science that might be targeted towards business folks, but educate yourself on that. And second is let the team that's the expert kind of guide you in terms of what the right foundation structure is. And it might take longer up front, but it's going to pay off dividends down the road.
Right. Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think, I think patience is obviously very important. There is a natural discovery process, natural exploration process, which needs to be followed. And I think it's really important that, again, all stakeholders are aligned.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can look at, like, these data projects as like a website. There's a lot more, I would say, nuance involved. And there's probably, I mean, not saying websites are easy, but they're much easier because there's a lot more preparatory work. So you cannot, like, it's hard to see it. So if you're not a technical person, you don't understand what the heck's going on behind the scenes. So, like, number one thing would be getting educated. The more educated you are as a CEO or a leader of the organization, the better decisions you're going to make around that. And you don't have to be a data scientist, but, like, the more you know about what work the data scientists and the data teams are doing, the better you'll be at making those decisions and understanding why certain investment needs to be made up front in the data. And by the way, if you don't make those investments in data, you're going to get left behind because others are. And then they're going to make smarter decisions.
So the message to the C-suite is understand the process and have patience.
Yeah. Well, patience, you need patience to execute anything. Like, I mean, when you listen to Steve Jobs and the people ask him, why did you succeed? He's like, well, because I didn't quit. So like, to succeed in any project, you're going to need patience. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. No, fair enough. That's a really important point. And I think that it's something that, we try and educate a lot of users on as well. Like, it's, these are discovery projects, they take a little bit of time. So, but I think going back to something you said a few discussion points ago was having measurable milestones along the way, right? So you don't feel like you're lost, so you feel like you're making progress and you have a way to benchmark whether you're hitting those milestones or not. So that's really important. I think that, one thing I'd like to add here from an engineering perspective, obviously that's the side that, we're coming in at Analytics 10X into these projects. They're really exciting to work on. I mean, with all the patience required and all the prep work and all the engineering that goes behind it, there's a lot of innovation as well. And I can point to a number of areas, where we had to use things like geospatial imagery, right, to understand, for example, course features, where are the trees versus where are the bunkers, that sort of thing, right? The other thing is that in terms of trying to improve the system and trying to reduce false positives, we also used sound engineering, sound ML, use videos to try and train models in different ways. And it's not something we can get into a lot of detail on, but it's just so important, I think, to make sure that all of this innovation is being there's space for all of this innovation from a financial and from a project perspective, but then also packaging all of that into a very seamless experience for the end user. So when the average user uses Arcos, they don't really realize what everything that's going behind the scenes, all of the different data points that are being captured and being analyzed to deliver that end user experience. So it's really important to have that, very clean sort of workflow, so the end user gets a really nice experience without even thinking about it. And I know you've done a lot of work on the product side, so just talk a little bit about that as well.
I mean, the beauty of AI is it should give you like really good answers, but simple answers in terms of actionable answers. And the user shouldn't have to know, there's a neural net running to calculate strokes gained, which is doing benchmarking and blah, blah, blah. Like users don't need to, they just need to know, I'll give you like a simple use case. So one of the value props of Arcos is, let's say you want to improve by 5 shots this year, and we're saying we can do that. Where are those 5 shots going to come for you? And so we created with you guys, with TENX, like the world's most advanced neural net model on what's called strokes gain, and it benchmarks performance for each skill level, gender, age group, blah, 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 like from every single spot on the golf course, any golf course in the world. And I won't get into crazy details about it, but that is a really hard problem, because like trying to take 500 million shots that are in there, creating like that neural net learning algorithm that then is able to predict what a certain skill level golfer is going to do from any point, any golf course in the world, all that stuff. So that was done, but the users don't know all the crazy stuff that went into that. All they know is, now I know where those 5-shot improvements going to come from. For me, it might be I have to putt better from 25 to 50 feet, and I have to hit better chip shots from 25 to 50 yards. And those are 2 things I got to work on. But so that's the end. Like I would say, like the answers have to be easy. Answers have to be digestible. Answers have to be actionable. But the hard work also has to be invisible. Otherwise, I think there's an overwhelming, like for the average user, it'll be too overwhelming. Like if we're showing, like, here's all the algorithms working like this, here's the calculation, and here's the output. They just want simple answers. They're like, we're doing all the work for them.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that's probably the easiest way to scare people off the platform, to have all of these calculations things visible.
Presenting like a math equation.
Exactly. That's great, Sal. I mean, we're almost out of time here. I think we need to move on to questions. But just a quick word on your experience working with a remote team. I know that the team with TENX and Analytics is based in Pakistan. You guys are mostly based in the US. There's, from my perspective, there's a really, really good working relationship between the teams. But there's people in the audience that are exploring that sort of arrangement with other teams, maybe within their own company, or working to contract, with maybe some external parties. Just talk a little bit about that. Like, how has it worked out for you working across time zones with, in Pakistan?
I can talk specifically about how it's worked out with you guys. We're still working together, so it's great. We've had, I think, like we get the time zone piece, since you guys are flexible enough with us doing early morning meetings, East Coast time. I think that's very helpful. I think also very important for us is language communication, because like all our engineers here, I mean, I don't think we might have one guy on the team who speaks Urdu, like one engineer from Pakistan. Otherwise, people don't. So like really important, and I think like the communication skills of the engineers that you've had on our teams have been excellent. And so that's really important. And then certainly the most important thing is the talent level. And for us, I would say we have that trust with you guys that's been built, that we know that you're going to give us really talented engineers. And there's like low turnover, like the engineers that have like worked on our projects have been with us for years on your team, which I think is important, builds those relationships. And then they're part of like the scrums and everything. I would say that constant interaction is really important, as opposed to feeling isolated. Early on, I got feedback from engineers at TENX. They're like, we don't know what the business is doing, why we're doing this. And when I was there presenting, and I realized, like they need to be part of the team, like the same communication I do with the team here, they need to be part of it. So we invite them to, we invite you guys to our like monthly company updates. We invite you guys to like all the scrums and stand-ups and everything. I think those interactions are really, really important. And I think like those are some of probably the highlights. One is quality. Like I know you guys always bring quality engineers. That's probably the most important, but the communication is also really important. Communication, language, time zone, all that stuff. I don't know what else to add. But I mean, I also think like I think there's a lot of really, I mean, I'm from Pakistan, so I know firsthand there's a lot of really good talent, like engineering talent in Pakistan. Like I don't know why it is, but it's there. And it's like we're unique in that we had the relationship with TENX, so we're able to tap into that. And it's hard to, like in the US, it's not easy to hire data scientists.
Right.
And I would say globally, it's hard to hire really good data scientists and data engineers. And so that's something where I think maybe Pakistan as a country has a big opportunity. Because like now with Zoom and all that stuff, like work from home becoming even post-COVID more of a norm, I think it's a bigger opportunity for countries like Pakistan to enable like the minds, the engineers, like the talent over there to get access to like some of the bigger problems that are being worked on in the world, which is going to be interesting.
Yeah, because all of a sudden it doesn't really matter anymore where you are physically. So I would agree with you. And I think
that is a lot less than it did 2 years ago. Yeah,
absolutely. And you know, one thing I'd want to echo is, and just before we wrap up, because I know we do need to move on to some questions here from the audience. But I think, you know, I would echo that, you know, being in that market, building teams in that market, there is a lot of talent available in Pakistan. And I think from a global level, it's highly underrated. You know, all the companies that we work with, people generally think of like other places in Asia, other places in Europe as maybe centers of talent. But I think that Pakistan really has a lot to offer in terms of highly skilled, and then obviously the communication skills as well, which are very important. And that's not something you find in many other places as well. Like you'll find good skills, but you won't really find the communication, or there might be other issues. So I think Pakistan is really the perfect all-round package when it comes to tech talent. So I think it's our job to, you know, change those perceptions and, you know, take Pakistan to the world, basically. All right, let's wrap up here. Thank you so much.
Let me ask you, is this just me and you talking, or are other people watching?
I believe there are other people watching. I've been assured that there are people watching.
Did you trick me into doing like an early morning chat with you?
Well, we'll put this on LinkedIn, so we'll get more eyeballs than just a few people that we can see here. But I've been told that there are other people on the call.
Hi, Syed. Sorry to interrupt you guys, but there are around 20 to 30 people, who are listening to you at the moment. And I believe this is being broadcasted on our YouTube as well. So that is another part, and we have good coverage. And it is a very exciting session, very insightful session, a very unique one, I believe. Thank you for your valuable time.
Absolutely. Yeah. My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. So do we have time for some questions here? If anybody has any questions from the audience?
This is not a feedback session. People can't actually, you know, question. But if there are any questions, I'll make sure I'll bug you guys on LinkedIn if you don't mind.
No, absolutely.
Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. See ya. Bye-bye.